This episode holds tender reflections on things many of us carry: spiritual exile, queer phobia, transphobia, illness, violence, grief, and survival. And it holds them alongside joy, irreverent humor, community, chosen family, everyday rituals, and the radical kindness of our community. Please listen in a way that honors your capacity. Take breaks, take breaths, come back later, or not at all. You don't owe anyone your pain. May you feel held, softened, or even seen, however you choose to engage. This series, Margins Made Holy, is brought to you by the Global Interfaith Network for people of all sexes, sexual orientations, gender identities, and expressions, or JINSOJI for short, with the support from the wonderful folks at Nebula Fund. I'm Aprupa or Apu, your host, your kin, your feminist auntie with a mic. I'm also the advocacy officer at JINSOJI, which basically means I scream about justice and joy in equal measure. So, what is this podcast? This is not a podcast about doctrine. It is not about which God is right or which ritual is wrong. It's about what happens when queerness meets prayer, when silence becomes a sanctuary, when places of worship turn you away and your body, messy, magnificent, defiant, becomes the altar. Margins Made Holy is not just a podcast. It's a living, breathing, beautifully chaotic audio archive of queer and trans people of faith across Asia. It's an offering, a homecoming, a howl, a soft landing. It's for all of us who've searched for ourselves in scripture, in ritual, in silence, and in each other. It's about reclamation, refusal, and radical belonging. These aren't polished interviews, they're conversations with cracked open hearts. It's about finding the sacred in grief, in gossip, in glitter, and in rage. Our guests speak from the richness of their lived experience, shaped by place, politics, spirit, and survival. Not everything may resonate, and that's okay. Take what you need and leave what you don't, and honor what stirs something in you. In this episode, we sit with Rahat. Together, we delve into the complexities of growing up in environments where festivals intended as celebrations are interwoven with gendered expectations, unspoken grief, and the compulsion to perform belonging. Rahat shares their candid reflections on returning home, not always to joyous rituals, but sometimes to silent role plays, and the journey of crafting their own queer sanctuaries through shared meals, deep friendships, nature, and gentle care. We explore the embodied experience of safety, not as an abstract concept, but as a tangible sensation. We discover how queer joy can manifest as disbelief, how faith and trauma can coexist within our nervous systems, and how authentic healing is inherently messy, relational, deeply political, and above all, collective. Rahat reminds us that healing isn't a destination to be rushed toward. It's a deliberate communal process, often unfolding amidst contradictions and at times in secrecy, especially in a world that hasn't always accommodated our full selves. They insist that as human beings, we were always meant to do difficult things and find courage with people. One of the first things we look at is, okay, what is your community like? Who are you connecting with? How do we find more of that so you can deal with these difficult spaces with others? In honor of Rahat's longings for home, for tradition, for their own terms, and for a culture that doesn't erase but embraces, we offer this Gujarati blessing. Sukhi thao, ane sukhi raho. May you become happy and remain so. Let's begin. Rahat is a queer, trauma informed somatic therapist based in India. Their practice is grounded in bodywork, resistance, and care. With them, we will discuss how the body knows faith, trauma, and queer survival. Rahat, welcome. Tell us a little bit about yourself and what's been feeling holy to you lately. It could be a practice, a boundary, a meme, anything that feels sacred to you at the moment.
Hi, Rupa. These days, I'm toying with the idea of calling myself a healer more than a therapist because I'm unlearning so much of my education, 10 years of learning in this Western system. And I'm coming back to trying to figure out what works. I'm in the process of still learning that. And I think something that's guiding that is all my wisdom learned and practiced around somatic work. So that's basically what roots the work I do. Yeah, so that's a little bit about me. And I love your question of what feels holy to me right now. I think it's my connection to the animals and trees around me. One of the ways I practice my spirituality is in connection to the world around me. And often the easiest way for me to do that is with plants and trees and cats and dogs and crows. Even as I'm talking about, it's bringing the sense of ease because that connection brings me a lot of support in it.
That's so lovely, Rahat. And it also feels so accessible for anyone and everyone because oftentimes our queerness or our transness is positioned as antithetical to our spirituality or to our faith. I want to explore how queerness arrived in your life. Was it quiet? Was it dramatic? Was it awkward? Did it happen all at once? Did it happen bit by bit? What can you recall about it?
I've always known I was queer without having the language for it. I've always had just the relationships I had, even as a toddler, even in preschool and first grade, is just the love and excitement and the kind of games I would play. Much to my mom's disapproval, I was always the husband, always playing these masculine roles, in love with all my friends. Then I saw Kate Winslet in Titanic when I was 6 years old, and that kind of cemented it for me. But it was still a bit by bit process of accepting it. As a kid, it was fine. Was a bit confusing, but not something I spent a lot of time trying to understand. I just knew my mom hated my dressing sense or just how I cut my hair. That was how it came up. But then as a teenager, I was very much ashamed of it. I was in an all girls Catholic school, and I was, anyways, just a really weird, which basically sport for very neurodivergent child. And I knew there was something wrong. And if people found out, I would be shamed. So it was something I kept quite hidden. And then it just got really easy to keep playing this role of this straight, hot teenager. It got me a lot of social capital. So it took me a long time to come into my queerness again. I think that finally really happened for me in my 20s. And it really happened to me through my friendships more than anything else. And building these relationships with these weird queer friends has been what's really helped me understand my sexuality, my gender, my identity. So it feels very new to me. I still feel like a baby here.
Yeah, we're at once a baby queer and a queer elder. And what you said about how friendships can be so influential in us being able to come to terms with various facets of our identity, not just our queerness, anything that's considered non normative or weird. Absolutely hear you on that. What about your faith, Rahat? What about maybe the culture and the faith that you were raised in and your relationship with it over the years as you also came to terms with your queerness?
Yeah, that's interesting because my dad has been very strong atheist and very against any religion or even spiritual practices. And it's interesting for me because since I was a kid, I was really craving some kind of spiritual practice. So for my brother and I, because we were also, even though my dad had this worldview of rejecting all of it, we were sent to Christian schools, which is what private schools here were. And we both grew up praying in school. So there was some practice that involved prayer for both of us. And we did that as children at home. And it was not accepted at all. So over time, like my dad made it very clear this was like not acceptable behavior to be religious in any way or even spiritual. So it became a very silent practice for me. It was something I was always craving. I think a big part of it was also the loneliness I was experiencing of feeling so different in so many ways and really wanting some sense of belonging. And because I was also in this very religious school, even though a lot of my peers were not necessarily Christians themselves, they were also religious. So a lot of my close friendships were with friends who practiced spirituality and religion in their houses. They had community and belonging around it. So I felt quite lonely for a very long time. And I think my queer identity and my spirituality came together. It all came from just accepting parts of myself. It's in my 20s that I started to understand that, like, my practice that I already had in some ways of connecting to the world and especially connecting with kindness and care to people or trees and nature and birds and animals, that was spirituality. That was the way I felt spiritual. And I slowly developed that in like different rituals involving a lot of queer ideas of like astrology and tarot, stuff I learned from my queer friends and partners. So it's something I built for myself. And for a long time, I felt like it was fake to do that. And now I can really feel into the real myself. There's a lot more confidence in accepting and embracing this practice that I've been.
Do you speak of how one influenced the other, how your queerness influenced your spirituality and vice versa, and how one practice speaks to the other as well? I'm also curious to hear a little bit about, given that you were raised very Hindu, not necessarily in a family, but like your surroundings possibly were quite Hindu. The festivals that are being celebrated are quite Hindu. The community gatherings, etc., also come from the same culture. What was that like, navigating your own spirituality, which seems very quote unquote offbeat, your queerness, and also like maybe the social relationship, because you also said reaching out to your faith was also a way for you to find community?
I think being part of the Hindu culture, the hardest part of it has been my gender identity and expression. And that's something that comes up each time for me because there's a very particular role that's expected of me around Diwali. Diwali is a huge festival for us. Even though my dad's not religious, Diwali is like this holiday for him where we bond as a family. We meet everyone in the extended family. It's a really big deal. And actually, in the last few years, I've created my own celebration of it. Maybe I can do it in a more queer way with my friends. Because at home, on those days, there's a sense of being a dutiful daughter. And I just feel really uncomfortable with that role. I also feel very uncomfortable with the role of, I don't know, the way people see me when I'm especially dressed in traditional Indian attire. And that's not necessarily how I see me or my friends see me, even in the same attire, but the way my family members might, the kind of assumptions they make of me. It feels really uncomfortable celebrating that. And there's a lot of sadness to that, especially now. I didn't feel that earlier, but now as my parents are growing older, I realize how much of the way I want to celebrate these days are at odds with them. And it does bring up a lot of sadness because in some ways I want to give them these joys that they've had when we were kids, also seeing celebrating in a certain way. And that also feels at odds with my needs. So I'm also trying to figure out like how to balance some of that. What I have really been enjoying is finding ways to celebrate Diwali or Eid or Christmas with a lot of my friends, especially my queer family, because a lot of us don't enjoy going home for these festivals. So we get to cook food or hang out with each other, listen to music, just have a good time together. And I think for me, connection with people is a big part of my spiritual practice. So that feels like enough for me.
Absolutely, Rahat. And I also love that you brought up queer joy and community in the same vein. So you said you're queer, you're non-binary, you're a therapist, and you're spiritual. Does it get messy? Is it magical? Is it a bit of both?
I guess it's a bit of both depending on what day you ask me. Today, feels both messy and magical. I think the moments of magic in my body are truly when I feel connected. And I think so many of the roles I play allow that. I'm so glad I do the work I do, as exhausting as it is. I really appreciate the connection I have with people. And that for me is a big part of meaning and purpose I have. So that feels great in my body. And then at the same time, relationships are really hard and there's always conflict and messes. And I'm choosing to do this work of connection. So that feels like a lot on a lot of days. So that's what I mean. It depends on when you ask me that question. You're asking me this question in a time period when I'm feeling really good about myself and my life and I'm optimistic and I'm feeling really connected in a really safe way to my friends and the world around me. So right now, a lot of it feels magical. But if you'd asked me a few months ago, I would have told you this is the worst thing ever. And trying to feel and connect with people in the world is not a good idea. So it really depends. But more of the time, because I've been doing this for so long now, it's been feeling more magical than messy on most days. But yeah, I don't always trust myself when I'm feeling great. I feel like I don't speak well enough for the depressed parts of me.
Oh, for sure. And you also forget what it feels like when you're not doing so great. The magic kind of takes over. It can be quite addictive and euphoric. And how has this queerness, this magic shaped the way that you love? And you spoke about lovers, you spoke about friends. Of course, there are clients, strangers that you interact with. Where do your politics meet your intimacy?
Oh, that's something I'm still figuring out. It's been really interesting to see the different ways in which I feel intensely and feel insecure and hurt and jealous and love and all of that. And at the same time, because of the work I do and because of the way I've learned about love, and it's been a theoretical learning also because of the work, like understanding attachment, learning about the definitions of love, I really try to guide my body to fit in with some of my politics. And this is the messy part of what my body holds. On some days, it's easier than on other days. But it's also something that feels really important for me to do because in doing so, I've also been able to build really beautiful relationships with people. I've changed the way I see so much of what relationships should be. I was just reflecting on this as I turned 30 that when I was 20, I really did assume that by now I would have a husband, I would have two children, I would be living this very domestic life with one partner to meet all my needs. And it feels unreal that this is something I grew up with and really believed and imagined for my future. When now I don't even know if I believe that one person can meet one in every need. So much of the relationships we see around us are really influenced by the culture we live in. So for me, I'm constantly asking myself, why does something have to look this way? And what does it mean if it doesn't? What does that mean for the possibilities my relationships have? And that's why I don't know if I have a definite answer what that looks like because it's still constantly an exploration. I think it keeps changing year by year as I understand myself more, as I understand the people around me a lot more. But I love that I'm no longer boxed in with the ideas I had about life. So that part of it is really exciting. What sucks is that I have to do the work to enjoy the fruits of thinking this way and believing these things. I have to actually do the emotional work to catch up to it.
Yeah, yeah. I often ask my therapist if she can just wave a magic wand and just make the process easier somehow.
I wish I could give that to you and I wish I could take that.
So, as a somatic therapist, you do help people come back to their bodies, which, in a manner of speaking, can feel like that magic wand almost, right? But as queer folks, many of us have left our bodies a long time ago. These are bodies that are very politicized, that are ostracized, that are also considered wrong. I know that you said one does the work and one does the work over and over again. On some days it's magical, on some days it's messy. But what is that starting point?
When I talk about doing somatic work and being a somatic practitioner, the goal of getting in touch with the body is one that's very far off. So the work is more about the process of doing that. And the process of doing that doesn't immediately involve sealing into our bodies. That's actually really threatening. Like you said, people have disconnected from their bodies for a reason. It's for our survival. So that's not something we start with. We actually start with connection to the other. That's where my spiritual practice has helped me, and I've seen how much it helps others also, where it doesn't have to be connection to the other who's a person also, because that can also feel really unsafe for most people. So we just start with connection to whatever part of the world you're in, whatever you can connect to. It can be an idea, it can be a belief, it can be an animal, it can be anything. In that process of building that connection, we start to feel safer. And as we build these connections and feel into the safety, we can then choose to come back to our body. It does get easier. But that is something that we're never pushing to move towards. And because I work with so many queer people and people who experience oppression in different ways, it's also advisable to disconnect from your body in so many ways. And we practice that intentionally as well.
So, what does safety feel like in one's body, or what does safety feel like in your body today? Not as theory, not as sensation, but also just want to explore maybe how that has changed over time.
That safety is different for different people and can be expressed in so many ways. For me, that shift over time has been just a deeper understanding of myself. So maybe a lot of what I'm feeling remains the same, but there's a little more settling that I feel into because I can understand and accept a lot of this now. I feel that not as a thought of me trying anymore, but I can sense it. And there is the sense of calm in being able to see that. It feels very soft to me. This change feels really soft and slow rather than something dramatic. Almost when the leaves change, when the season changes, it just happens. And you start noticing it when the colors have changed enough. But before that, your eyes are just not drawn to it. You don't realize it's happening. It's been in the process of happening for months. So, yeah, that's what it feels like right now.
And is that very similar to what queer joy might also feel like in one's nervous system? That slow, gradual settling into oneself. And like you said, we don't often look at it, we don't often acknowledge it or recognize it when it arrives. But how can we be more intentional about it? What does an embodied celebration of pleasure as resistance look like?
For me, I know as soon as I think about queer joy and celebration, I just think of the queer relationships I have. That is so much joy for me. That ease of being in these relationships, or even the loving discomfort of being in them and celebrating the love around me. That is queer joy for me. That celebration of love, that valuing and honoring of relationships. That's what the joy feels like.
Yeah, likewise to me as well. But trauma, faith, and queerness can also split us almost between survival and truth. Have you ever had to choose between belonging and authenticity? And what did your body know before your mind could even catch up?
I think that's something I honestly have to choose quite often, especially as someone who is living alone in Bombay, which is quite safe in general, but still not. I've been living in this place I am for 2 years. I try very hard to keep my queer relationship under wraps. I don't introduce myself as a non binary person, and that is uncomfortable for me. It does bring some sense of sadness for me. And I know I also chose to do that with my extended family. The last 10 years, I've spent time moving away from them because I needed the space. I could feel that I couldn't express myself around them and couldn't be myself. So I spent a lot of time away from them to be able to feel secure in my identity. And now that I go back there, it's not that I shed exactly who I am, but I definitely hide parts of myself to feel that sense of belonging with them. And a lot of that is in moments of celebration, like we celebrate Diwali or Christmas together or weddings. And in all of these spaces, I do feel like the odd one out because so many of my cousins, my family are also like in these marriages. I can't get married here to my partner. And it does feel very straight and heteronormative, and it does feel exclusionary. And I also know I'm choosing to continue to be part of these spaces because there's also a lot of attachment to these spaces. And I guess I've come to terms to some extent with the sadness of having to definitely hide parts of myself to live the life I want. And I hate that. And I love that I have my chosen family to complain and cry about it with and to feel that anger and acceptance and love around. But to live in the larger world I'm in right now, I definitely do on a daily basis have to hide parts of myself.
Yeah. And that is violent. Let's call it what it is. It's not easy to be put in that position. It's not easy to have to constantly prioritize safety over just expressing or being authentic. So, what rituals then help you discharge this collective grief? You've spoken about venting to your friends, raging, complaining, ancestral trauma, and vicarious healing and sacred release are still things that we must talk about as a community. It's not enough for us to just lean into hope and lean into positivity. Of course, those are very powerful tools. But outside of that, how do we sit with this mess?
Before coming into this conversation today, I was just reflecting on a lot of these themes and thinking about how I would have really loved a place to show up with my queer friends and family and community, the way religious institutions have that, where people can show up, a space of gathering. And I realize how much I don't have that here. And because for me, healing is so much in connection, I have to create that and find that for myself. And I am lucky and privileged enough. I live in a city where there are so many queer people who are also out, and it is relatively safer. So I can connect with them and protest with them or love with them and celebrate with them. But I sometimes envy, I guess, also because I grew up with this desire for spirituality and belonging that somewhere still lingers. My close friends are still, while they're figuring out their relationship, their places of worship, like the church, they're still participating in it. And I sometimes envy that. And I wish we could have something like that for ourselves. And I haven't found that yet, but I'm hoping we can create community spaces like that can help us release so much of this to like just come together. There's a lot of power in people coming together, whether it's in anger or joy or song or celebration. And I'm definitely looking for that space of connection. And maybe if I have the bandwidth sometime, maybe creating that kind of space.
Oh, like a queer somatic healing retreat. What are your thoughts about that?
I think there's so much healing that just comes from just being together and the sense of belonging and joy. And then I think like the somatic therapy part of it comes in more as something that supports individuals. But so much of healing comes through community gatherings and community connection. So I feel like if we have enough of that, then the kind of work I do takes more of a backseat. I know most therapists feel that way, that the work we do is very individual, more band-aid, helping one person deal with a lot more systemic concerns. When we actually, what we really need is community spaces and connection and belonging in those spaces.
Absolutely. And you also make healing sound like such a spiritual act. So, how do you navigate this spiritual bypassing that is so rampant?
That is really a tough one because I'm also navigating it with some sense of denial because it feels exhausting to look at. And it's complicated because it's like I sometimes will be having conversations about healing and I think I'm on the same page with someone about it. And then I realize, okay, their politics don't really align with what I see healing as. Like healing isn't individual. It is about community. It's about how you treat people around you and how you treat the world in general. So when it becomes just about yourself and moving forward, that feels very disconnected. And I don't see that as that. And I think like I said in the start, I'm in the process of trying to unlearn so much of what I've studied under. And what I have learned from Western ideas is individualistic. And it is difficult for me to figure out how to be an ethical therapist. I feel like something about this individual process right now doesn't sit right with me. And a lot of times it is me validating someone's spiritual bypassing. And that is something I have to come to terms with as well.
And how would you say that your body has unlearned these things that we've been fed about goodness and purity and deservingness, which, of course, in a context that you come from, India, there absolutely are caste, class, other kinds of oppressive implications to it, whether that's been through queerness, through therapy. How have you dismantled those moral codes that trauma and faith traditions often encode?
This idea of goodness has definitely been a big one for me. It also, like I mentioned earlier, a role I've played in my family system as like the good daughter or the good kid. And so there are a lot of ideas of what it means to be a good person or morally good. I'm realizing now more than ever before how what we also deem as good depends on what is going on politically and culturally around us. What is good for one person is not for the other. So a lot of it for me, when I'm realizing I'm unlearning it, is also, it feels like less hypervigilance in my body, honestly, because I think earlier there was this sense of trying to understand if every action I or someone else does is good enough. And now I've realized I'm taking or trying to take more of a step back and get curious of, okay, humans are always interesting and behaving in different ways that can be understood in their context. So how do I step back and get curious about that rather than jumping to a judgment and a value statement, which right now, as I say it, it seems like I've done all of this work and I'm definitely there, but it's not. It's something I'm still trying to figure out. And the first step of it that I noticed the change in myself is just this little bit less hypervigilance about just the idea of goodness and purity and like what that means.
Yeah, definitely. And through your work, you've extensively also spoken about how we're all capable of harm. And there are spaces that have also caused us harm as queer people, as people of faith, as people who might or might not have any kind of spiritual beliefs, people who hail from a certain culture, etc. So, how do we return to these spaces that once harmed us, whether that's the temples, the churches, the homes, our own skin, like we discussed previously, and what makes that possible or impossible?
I think I'm going to come back to this sense of connection with people. I don't think we can face any of this individually. The process of connecting to people and using that safety to come back to these spaces, you need to do it with a community, I think, that just helps you feel so much stronger.
We'll have to be in connection with each other. But many a times that connection may not be safe for us or may not meet us the way that we need for it to. So how does one seek connection in a space like that?
I think what you're also bringing up is just how messy connection can be. Like sometimes we can feel connected to people and it's not fully safe. There's some needs met and some just are not. And some of it is also navigating that mess and figuring out how to stay with that messiness that these imperfect relationships bring us. But something I come back to is spirituality as a connection. If it's not with a person, just the belief and sense of faith also, how that can bolster you. When I was talking to one of my friends, she's grown up in the church. And I was just curious about what Jesus meant to her. And one of the things she said is for her, that has been the first experience of compassion. Like when she connects with Christ, for her, that feels like compassion in her body. And that connection is also similar to how I feel when I am connecting, especially with trees. I feel the sense of strength especially when there's a sense of loneliness. I've realized that if I can go to a park, if I could just go hug a tree, if I can go talk to an animal, that sense of connection feels helpful just a little bit to then find the courage to do the harder stuff. It's definitely not a perfect solution, not a easy one necessarily, and one that I think requires a lot of day-to-day practice in doing so. But I guess this is what makes sense to me right now.
Absolutely. And these are aspects that one can connect to without having to share much, without having to put everything into words, without necessarily even using language. And that's another common thread that I find in your work, which is you move away from this emphasis on having to verbalize everything, having to articulate everything and use language, and especially a colonial language such as English, to maybe sensing in and feeling in. Would you say that in itself is such an act of resistance?
Yeah, 100%. And I especially feel that because I briefly was talking about neurodivergence and how I relate to that. And I work with lots of clients like that. And language is not easily accessible to everyone. And as soon as we stop putting pressure on it and look at like different ways of communicating, things can just get so much easier. And I feel like that's been a very fun part of my work also, to move away from this emphasis on communicating just in one specific way and get curious about the different other ways in which we're interacting and communicating constantly and what feels easier to some of us, even if it's not socially validated or paid attention to as much.
That's quite beautiful, isn't it? When would you say was the last time your body surprised you? Whether that was with joy, resistance, grief, desire. And what does one do with this surprise?
The first thing that comes to mind is I am right now quite surprised in how safe I'm feeling in my friendship. I've not felt that most of my life. I think it's like this sense of disbelief and like waiting for the other shoe to drop. And because I know this theoretically, I'm constantly trying to practice it in some way of like trying to stay with what's happening right now and trusting that it's real, which isn't easier, right? When it surprises us, especially when it's like joy or something you've been trying to fight for or get so long. Once you get it or feel it can feel unreal. Do try to keep reminding myself it's happening or leaning into it or sharing it and talking about it. But yeah, other than that, it's still a journey for me to figure out what to do with it. I think one thing that's been really helpful for me, actually, especially when I'm trying to do some of this alone, like besides connection with others, is been really exploring all of the resources online, like different podcasts like this one as well, or just random Reddit communities. I find a lot of joy on Reddit because there's such weirdos online. I feel so connected to queers around the world when I'm exploring all of this content and online, and I feel so much less alone and this sense of belonging, which feels so good. There's so much queer joy in that, also seeing other queers succeed or share their story.
That's how I was also exposed to the idea of queerness, let alone my own queerness, is through this when the community around me or the people around me weren't necessarily either aware, weren't necessarily talking about it in a very positive manner. So absolutely, just experiencing spaces like this, even virtually, can be so meaningful and powerful. So thank you so much for being in conversation with us.
Thank you, Papa. Have a good day.
Thank you so much. And thank you to our listeners for tuning in. If you'd like to carry this conversation forward, here are 3 ways to begin. You could consider journaling. What part of you rolled its eyes during this episode? Start there. What didn't you want to feel and why? Write without trying to sound wise. Just be honest. And if it gets uncomfortable, that's not always a sign to stop, just a sign to go gently. You could even try a small ritual. You could light a candle, play a song, sit in silence, boil some tea, lie on the floor, scroll your camera roll till something softens. No pressure to call it healing, not to fix or figure anything out, just to notice what's alive in you. And connect with us. We'd love to hear what spoke to you, what challenged you, or what lingered after the episode. You can find us on social media at Ginsogie, that's GINSSOGIE. This archive is built through conversation, not conclusion. So come as you are, with doubt, with hope, or simply with the need to feel less alone. We're so glad you're here, and we'll meet you again in the next episode.